Hello, everybody, and welcome to our session on tips for reviving or establishing a new project management office or PMO. Let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Kim Koster, and I specialize in project and financial management. Over the years, I've seen great PMOs and PMOs that weren't so effective, and I look forward to sharing some of those insights with you today. So, why should we have a PMO? And there's really one simple reason, and that is that the PMO is the backbone of a successful project management approach. And since project management is our lifeblood for a project-based business, we need to make sure that we're handling that in a very disciplined way. Now, there are centralized and decentralized PMOs. Centralized are enterprise-wide, or EPMOs, and decentralized may be centered around a project or a program. Whether they're centralized or decentralized, they're a function that provides decision support information for projects. A PMO does not make any decisions itself. It's the primary enabler for project execution components that are managed in a very disciplined way. The Project Management Institute Program Management Office Community of Practice, that's a mouthful, describes the PMO as a strategic driver for organizational excellence, which seeks to enhance the practices of execution management, organizational governance, and strategic change leadership. And I think that pretty much says it all. And as you can see from the chart above, PMOs are on the rise overall. That means that organizations are seeing the value of having a PMO. Now, I pulled all this information from PMI's Pulse of the Profession. And I want to just give you some of the information that I got from that report. It says that organizations can bridge the chasm between high-level strategic vision and implementation with a PMO. Among organizations in their survey that have a PMO, half report having enterprise-wide, and those that align that enterprise-wide PMO to their strategy report 38% more projects meet original goals and business intent, and 33% fewer projects are deemed failure. To me, that's a pretty compelling reason to have a PMO. Now, you may have an organization that already has a PMO that's really not so effective. And that PMO may stand for things like please more outcome or please more output. And the overall organization doesn't see the value of the PMO. At the water cooler, you may be hearing things like, the PMO is just an overhead function. They don't care about project performance or corporate strategy. They don't know how to do resource management, and they keep putting out nonsensical policies and procedures that we can't use. If you're hearing these types of comments, it's really time to look at reviving your PMO, and we'll talk about 8 steps to help you do that. If you don't have a PMO as of now, you can still follow these tips to make your PMO a true center of excellence. All right, the first tip that we're going to talk about is collaboration. Projects in and of themselves, they're social. Now, it took me a bit to really understand that, but it's so very true. There has to be constant and continuous interaction between functional groups, project personnel, executive management, subcontractors, vendors, and most importantly, your customer. If projects themselves are social, so should the PMO, and they should recognize the social needs of all the projects within the enterprise. The PMO needs to ask the stakeholders how they can help them succeed, because honestly, project teams are the customers of the PMO, so they really need to be servicing those teams. Now, communication between the PMO and the project managers should start with talking about what are the major pains and problems that they're having. Maybe it's resource management or change management, but the PMO should really take the time to understand the problem and then the effect it's having on execution. Ask the project teams if the policies and procedures are still what they need. Ask if they have the right tools to do the job. We're now in a virtual office situation, so it's very feasible to have continual communication via the web, even though we may not be face-to-face all the time. If you're just starting up your PMO, you'll need to be asking those same kinds of questions. And the one thing left that I want to talk about from a communication collaboration perspective is be sure you establish a business cadence or a rhythm and establish that early. It's far more than just a schedule of events. It really becomes a part of your culture and provides teams a way to communicate. And so keep in mind that great projects and organizations truly are developing an overall collaborative culture. All right, our second tip is really understand what the purpose of the PMO is within the organization. Is the PMO part of the solution or are they part of the problem? To be a part of the solution, we need to make sure that the PMO has a vision statement and a charter. So let's start off with a quick definition of a vision. A vision statement is an idealistic view of the desired outcomes to be produced for the organization. And in this instance, the organization is the PMO. It's a vivid description of what the organization will be like, so to inspire project teams to want to follow the lead of the PMO and find value in the services that the PMO is providing. Now, a charter defines or mandates its functions, and it's going to lay down rules for the conduct and governance of the PMO. So why are these things so important? The reason they're important is they create buy-in from the project teams and other stakeholders, and it tells the organization what the rules are for the use of the PMO. Let's just go over a couple of the main activities that a PMO should be responsible for. And that is that they're keeping the policies current. You also want to have those policies be tailorable. What works for a major project with earned value management doesn't necessarily work for a 3-month services project. Also, understanding resource management. That's critical. Actually, resource management, doesn't just affect the project. It affects all the functional groups within the organization. And one that I didn't think of when I was younger and running projects was the effect it had on HR. So from an HR perspective, we needed to be able to tell them and signal them what kind of skill sets we were going to need in the future. We also need to make sure that we understand what KPIs are used to help manage projects. So we want to make sure that they're baked with the org goals in mind, that they're owned by the right person, and that they're put in a common language that everyone can understand. We also want to have the PMO provide at least some basic consistent reporting. And so, making sure that there's some basic reporting that's the same for all the projects. I've been on thousands of projects over my career, and if you allow that terminal uniqueness in reporting, you're going to end up with hundreds of reports that you're going to have to continually create, recreate, and then maintain. The other thing that the PMO should really be leading the charge on is role-based training, and that's role-based training on the policies and procedures. That's important because then people know exactly what they're supposed to do, but they also know what the downstream effect is of not following that process and procedure on other teams. And there's other purposes and responsibilities of the PMO, but those are the major ones that I wanted to discuss today. Now, let's take a deeper dive into policy creation and update. So we should be continually re-looking at those policies and procedures and updating as necessary. Those should be a living document based on our business conditions. So the policy should establish best practices for the organization, and they should reflect best practices that are out there in your marketplace. You also want to assure that those policies and procedures are helping the teams be successful, that they're not just having to follow it because it's out there, but that it truly is helping them manage projects. We also want to make sure that there's a repository where all stakeholders can get the current documents. And we don't want to confuse those stakeholders with having 2012, 13, 14, 15 updates. Have the most current ones out there that they can access and get in, not have to make that decision. You also want to create, the PMO wants to create a feedback loop on those policies and procedures. So if there's things that are out of date or things that are difficult for maybe a new project type that you've just received, you want to make sure that you're continually communicating so that you understand what those projects need. You also want to have a self-audit plan. So the PMO should be creating that plan, going out, talking to the projects, making sure that they're adhering to the processes and procedures. And if they're not, for some reason, put in any corrective action. If it's culture corrective actions, put those in. If it's a change to the policy and procedure, put those in. So again, I cannot stress how important those policies and procedures actually are in the organization. The fourth tip is make sure that you power the entire project lifecycle. So a lot of times we get pigeonholed thinking just about execution, but we really need to be looking at how we're going to manage projects when we're doing the bid. So when we're estimating, we're creating the work breakdown structure, and we're thinking about the best way to manage that project. Also in the initiation phase, where we're setting the baseline for both the budget and the schedule, and we're also setting up costing structures and things, we need to make sure that we understand how and help projects actually do that so that they can execute successfully. And one other really important item is closeout. That's something when I was in the business, I never really wanted to think about, but it's a very important aspect of closing out the project and finishing it up and getting those final billings completed. So again, we want to make sure that the project management office is making the entire project lifecycle come alive. All right. The fifth tip is really check the skills of your project teams. So there is increasing need for skilled professionals in the project management field. And one of the largest challenges has been in inexperienced project managers over the years. So we really want to help bolster up the project managers in our organization. So training to understand the project management discipline is necessary. A lot of it is a learned skill. The more project managers understand their role, the less likely they are that we're going to have projects with cost and schedule issues. Project outcomes will significantly be better in organizations that invest in ongoing project management training, that they're providing a career path for project managers, and that they're establishing formal processes to develop those project management competencies when compared to organizations that don't invest in any of them. Keep in mind, too, that there's other project team members that also need training. You may have financial analysts, schedulers, resource managers, control account managers. All those guys need training, too. And just some thoughts about the training. I mentioned role-based training for tools and policies and procedures. That's very important. Other things might be certifications that you want to provide, so letting them go off and become certified PMPs or EVMPs, or you may have your own certifications within your organization. And then coaching and mentoring programs. That's something that can be done easily within the organization. And one of my favorites was the 360 feedback. Sometimes that was a little bit hard to take right at first, but it sure gave you some great insight into what your skills were and how you needed to improve. All right. The sixth tip is really thinking about KPIs. So let's start off by talking about what a KPI actually is. And by the way, KPI stands for Key Performance Indicator. It's a measurement of activity that reveals how a business or team is performing against its goals. Now, KPIs are the most critical metrics that measure the success of specific activities used to meet business goals. And you should be measuring these against a target or a benchmark so that there's some context of whether or not it's good or bad. Now, what a KPI is not. If a measurement of activity or metric does not directly influence the achievement of your business goals, it's not a KPI, it's simply a metric. So not all measures are equally important. Therefore, not all metrics are KPIs. The other thing about a KPI is that it's only as valuable as the action it inspires. And too often, organizations just follow the pack and use industry-recognized KPIs, and then they wonder why the KPI doesn't reflect their own business and fails to make a positive change. So make sure that the KPIs are very relevant to your business. Another important aspect of KPIs is that they are a form of communication, and they need to have the same rules and best practices as any other form of communication within your organization. Succinct, clear, relevant, and current information is much more likely to be absorbed and acted upon. One way to evaluate the relevance of your KPIs is to use the SMART criteria. And you can have the SMART criteria. If you go out on Wikipedia, you can see that you can make that acronym, different depending on what your business is. But for this example that I'm using now, the KPIs should be specific. We should be able to measure it. It should be attainable. It should be realistic. And we should be able to do it in the time frame that we need to meet the goal. So again, KPIs should answer all of these questions, and we can also go in, and now we've made our first KPIs SMART, but we can also make them smarter. So the SMART criteria can be expanded, and we now should be evaluating and re-evaluating to ensure that our KPIs and are continuing to be relevant to our business. For example, if you've exceeded your growth target for the current year, You should determine if you set that target correctly or if you did something extraordinary occurred. So you got a major contract out of the blue. Something happened, and then that caused you to get that contract, but you wouldn't have, you weren't planning for it. Or did you just excel? So you want to be constantly looking and relooking for improvement, and then continually changing those KPIs based on what your overall goals are. All right. The seventh tip is to align to your corporate goals. So the PMOs that support corporate strategic initiatives will provide more value to the overall company. PMOs that are effective will have a lot of responsibility. They're going to be in demand, and they're going to help keep focus on those goals and deliver value. Alignment tends to be difficult in matrix and siloed organizations, but when all the organizations are marching to the same drummer for a common goal, then we're going to see that true alignment. At that point, the roles and responsibilities are clear, and it's very easy to follow the objectives. So PMOs that are truly influential in the organizations or company have their goals, mission, and their KPIs defined, and they're clearly linked to corporate goals. It's really important too because executives are going to see the value of the PMO, and it's going to help others then want to use and utilize the PMO. So executive buy-in is a major factor. You're going to want your PMO to demonstrate results, and you want to make those results very visible to the organization. The more visible positive results provided by the PMO, the better the overall perception of the PMO will be. This in turn will allow the PMO to become more strategic and evolve to what we call best-in-class status. All right, so our eighth tip is to really provide project teams a tool set for success. And when I talk about a tool set, I mean a tool set of people, processes, and tools. All right, so from a people perspective, everyone in the business says people are our most important asset, and this is very true in the execution of projects. We put the right people in place, we train them, and then these next two components are going to fall right into place. So from a process perspective, you have to have processes in order to have successful projects. People have to write those processes, and people have to follow those processes and procedures. Tools. You need tools that enable project success, and you need qualified people to run those tools, and you need those people to be trained in order to use and maximize the tools. It's amazing how these three components fit together so well and how interdependent they are on each other. I can do an entire webcast on that topic, but what you're going to be wanting to ask yourself is how well are your people, process, and tools aligned? To be best in class, they must be aligned. All right, well, that really concludes our 8 tips. And, the reason that we have the PMO is to make projects successful. So it all boils down to project planning and execution. And I wish you all the best in your execution of your projects. And if Unanet can help you, please contact us at unanet.com, and we would be happy to share some of our experience with you as well as our tool set. Thank you very much.